So today, I want to talk about the Utah Jazz, which is not a sentence that I have said very many times in my life, but believe it or not, I have found my way into being genuinely interested in a Utah Jazz team, and that doesn't often happen. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Buckets. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second, and it makes a massive difference in how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. I have found the rebuild process that they have undertaken in this last year, going on now into this year, to be one of the most well-executed rebuilds that I have ever seen. It could potentially go down as one of the best of all time, depending on how the players that I'm going to talk about in this video do end up panning out. But I think Utah has put together a very strong young core very quickly, on top, of course, having a player like Lauri Markkanen, who I don't know you'd consider a young core member, but he is also not an old player, so he's still very, very much a part of your future. But obviously they had a couple of years with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell where they were a very, very good regular season team year after year, and then it turned out that the defensive scheme was pretty much entirely predicated on Rudy Gobert bailing everybody out. And that works in a regular season when teams are not going that hard, but then when they are going hard in the postseason, you get something like Terrence Mann hitting 7 3-pointers. I think all of them basically corner threes. Utah's perimeter defenders could not actually defend the perimeter. And then on offense, if Donovan Mitchell was not creating the shot, there was not much creation to be had. Mike Conley could do some stuff secondarily. Bogdanovich could do some stuff secondarily, but they were kind of heavily relying on Donovan Mitchell to do all the heavy lifting on offense, and they were relying on Rudy to do all the heavy lifting on defense. As a result, they kept losing in the playoffs, and given the ages of both of these players, given the regular season success that Utah has found with them, which they have not had in a very long time, it would have made perfect sense for them to do what most franchises would have done, which would be to just stick with those guys for another couple of years and see how it pans out. It is like, for an example, it's not necessarily the best example because obviously it ended up working out for Memphis given how that team has turned into over the past few years, but it was like the last 3 years of Gasol and Mike Conley, it was like, okay, we can wrap this thing up. We know this isn't really going anywhere. It felt like Rudy and Mitchell were like a year removed from that state of being where it's like, okay, we're just kind of delaying the inevitable of these guys being moved. It's very clear that this is not going to be a contending level team. But for a team like Utah, a smaller franchise, a team that does not find a ton of success easy given their market value and what they really attract free agent-wise and all that, the Jazz have actually been a pretty well-run organization historically, to be fair, but they had gone through a decent bit of a slump. Gordon Hayward managed to pull them to the playoffs, and then once Gordon was replaced with Donovan and they still were there, it was a place they would have liked to be for a while. But the front office was proactive and knew when to pull the plug. They really could not have timed this any better. I think they gave both Mitchell and Gobert as a duo a decent run in terms of actually putting talent around them. Could have been better, sure, but ultimately I think they put good enough pieces around them. They saw a couple of instances of that team having a chance, realized it wasn't really going to go anywhere. They gave them the exact appropriate amount of time, and then they blew everything up. So many teams would have delayed that decision by a couple of years. So the fact that they didn't is already an amazing move. But then you take into account the incredible overhaul that they got for both Rudy especially, as well as Donovan. Just so much in return for those two players that I think has more than turned out to be more valuable than those guys individually, especially projecting a few years in the line. Like, starting off, I think it's 4 at least unprotected first round picks on both deals for both of those guys for 2 different franchises. So that's already quite a bit in terms of the asset tool chest. And then you got Ochai Agbaji, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, who is someone that I think very highly of. If you want to know a lot more about him, you should check out Alex Hoops' video on him. Very, very good. It's the one with like the pink player silhouette with a question mark in it in the thumbnail. But he's a very, very good shooter, has a really good NBA body, is a big shooting guard. I believe he shot like lights out on corner threes his rookie year. And I think he has some creation upside. I think he has a lot of upside overall as an offensive player. And he has decent defense as well, some playmaking ability. Guy I think will be pretty good. Then you get Walker Kessler, who I don't remember what the exact context of how they got him was. I think they might have not been directly a part of that trade, but whatever. He is really good. I haven't mentioned Keyonte George yet, but he's also someone I want to talk about. But I saw an interesting post on Twitter, which was more black and white and simplistic than the reality of the situation. But the overall sentiment was something along the lines of, you know, the Jazz traded Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, and then within 2 draft cycles, drafted those 2 players again, essentially, with Walker Kessler and Keyonte George. Walker is a great shot blocker and rebounder and solid around the rim, good percentages, not a high volume guy, but ultimately shoots like 70% from the field. If you look at his last 22 games, when he like really solidified himself as a starter and was getting 30-ish minutes a game, he averaged 12 points per game, 12 rebounds per game, and 3 blocks. So kind of seems like he's already replicating that kind of production that Rudy did. I also remember earlier or later in the season, but I guess earlier in time because that time has since passed. But I saw a stat about his rim protection stuff, like advanced rim protection stuff, and he was charting above where Rudy Gobert is currently in that specific department. So seems like they got a guy who I'm not going to necessarily say he's going to be as good as a 3-time defensive player of the year. I'm pretty sure Rudy has 3. But he's going to be at least 80% as good as Rudy Gobert was for a late first round pick salary instead of the Supermax. In the case of Keyonte George, obviously we've only seen Summer League from him, and that's why I'm like, I'm not just going to fully ride with the sentiment of like, oh, they just drafted a Donovan Mitchell replacement, because Donovan Mitchell is a ridiculous offensive player. We're talking about someone who scored 70 points in the NBA. I don't care about literally anything else. If you've done that, you can score the shit out of the ball. And with that being the case, I wouldn't project that onto him necessarily yet, but I will say the signs in the Summer League could not have been more encouraging. It's not so much about the fact that he hit the shots that he did, but rather the fashion in which he took them, both in terms of like how he actually got those shots, how he created them in terms of his skills, but also his confidence was like overbearing, like incredibly noteworthy and significant confidence from him. And the types of shots that he was hitting, the types of shots that he was taking, the types of shots that he was creating for himself and his teammates, I think he's going to be really good. So I'm buying that stock. I'd buy all the Walker Kessler stock. I would buy plenty of Ochai's stock. And obviously Lauri Markkanen had like one of the most efficient 23 point per game seasons ever. It was something like that. He just had a great all-star season. Like, even though everyone knows that Lauri had a huge breakout year last year, I think even in that, he is still a little bit underrated, because I think he's a closer to like the 25th best player in the NBA than you might think. He might actually be in that tier, and I'm just not really thinking about it that hard, but he's fucking good, man. So you have a guy who I think could potentially be a perennial all-star, at least when the winning comes along. I don't know if it's necessarily going to happen this year. Keyonte George, who I think is going to be very good. Ochai, who I think is going to be very good. and Walker, who I think is going to be very good. They also have another draft pick, I think, that I'm not mentioning and probably should, but I didn't see much of them. I saw a lot of Keontae George, so whoever else I should have talked about, my apologies. But I just wanted to point out, man, what a couple of trades for Utah. What great timing by that front office. They're set up very well for the future. In terms of brighter futures in the league, they're probably in like the top 5 of that conversation at the bare minimum. And they managed to get there. Going into this season, it's only been 1 year that it's taken for them to completely turn this roster to a asset treasure trove with a bunch of young players with upside. And they did that instead of dragging on a team that was never going to win a championship for years. And that's not something most NBA teams would have the balls to do. Anyways, shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.